Welcome, everyone. My name is Beth Davis. I'm the co-chair of the Southern Piedmont Native Plant Society chapter. We're so glad to have all of you here today with us in person and with today's event about carnivorous plants. It's a North Carolina native, and so we were just really excited about planning this, and we're thankful for all of you who joined us and all of the people across the state and locally who are with us today on Zoom as well. So it's an experiment for us, but we're excited about it. We are also very grateful to all of the staff at UNC Charlotte Botanical Garden who are co-hosting with us today. Amy Tipton, the assistant director of the Botanical Gardens, has worked very hard to make this program possible, and we're very grateful for her. And April Fawcett has stepped in to help us today, and Paula Gross, the former assistant director of the Botanical Gardens, who some of you made these beautiful bog gardens with today. So it's been a very collaborative effort to bring this to you today. So thank you to everyone. Amy was going to be with us in person today, but unfortunately she is having to quarantine. So she is in her office at the greenhouse, speaking to us from there. And we had hoped to have Larry Mellichamp with us today, but unfortunately he is having some health issues and is not able to join us. However, we do have a video that he produced with Amy about carnivorous plants, which was really what got us inspired for this meeting, and with Amy. So we have that to share with you today. And he and Amy talked about the presentation and worked on it jointly. So now I'm going to turn the meeting over to Amy, and she should come with us on Zoom now.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am delighted to be able to talk to you about carnivorous plants. I wish that Dr. M was with us as well, but hopefully he'll be back with us very soon. So a little bit about the gardens. I wanted to mention that we have the UNC Charlotte Botanical Gardens has a gardens membership, and we encourage you to join the gardens because joining is not very expensive, and it comes with all kinds of perks, including admission to our seasonal plant sales during the preview day, plus a 10 or 15% discount on your purchases at the sales on that preview day. In addition, we have a nice reciprocal program with the American Horticultural Society, which allows us to partner with 345 gardens and arboreta throughout the North American continent in order to provide free and discounted admissions, parking, and gift shop discounts. Everything from the Denver Botanical Garden to I can't remember all of them, but there are so many big name gardens on that list. And so if you join our gardens, you get the benefit of membership at many of these other gardens. In addition, we have discounts for some of our classes. We have certain membership events that are free or discounted for our members. And we also have cooperating local businesses which offer our members discounts. And the real benefit, the reason that most people join, is for the fall and spring plant sales because of the discounts. Also in the fall plant sale, all of our members get a free plant as well, and for rejoining. And so the dates for our fall plant sale have been determined. We'll start with the members preview sale on September 30th, and then we'll go into the public sale October 1st and 2nd. So mark your calendars for that, and we hope to see you there. I know many of you are native plant enthusiasts because of the way that you're joining this today, and we all are as well here at the gardens, and many of our plants. In fact, I would say the vast majority of our plants are natives. So, and we have herbs, herbaceous plants, I mean, ferns, trees, shrubs, vines, all kinds of things. And then another event that I wanted to mention to you is our annual symposium, which is called Urban Roots. And we're really excited about this program because the theme is going to be African influences on American crops and cuisine. And we have several speakers who are published authors in this niche of agriculture and urban revitalization and cuisine, a chef and a farmer, and several others. So this symposium will be in person as well as hybrid with an online option. So I would encourage you to check that out and mark your calendar for October the 30th. We always have a nice array of gardening classes. Some are based on our Certificate of Native Plant Studies program, which includes plant identification classes, such as our Native Shrub ID and Native Tree ID that I'll be teaching in the fall months. We also have some at home in the gardens, which are classes that you get a discount for being a member and that includes vegetable gardening, composting, and botanical watercolor. So lots of exciting stuff. We can be reached on our website. Also, our events calendar is posted there. We have a Facebook page and Instagram page, so check us out. And then I just wanted to remind you that our outdoor gardens are open dawn till dusk, and the greenhouse is now reopened as of last month, about this time last month. And it includes our carnivorous courtyard, which is a wonder. It's just beautiful. Tammy, our greenhouse manager, does a wonderful job with these plants. So if you're interested in what you see today during the slide presentation, I would encourage you to stop by. It just so happens that today for this particular program, the greenhouse is open until 4 p.m. Usually we're closed on weekends since COVID began, but we will be open regular hours Monday through Friday. And now to our program. As Beth mentioned, Dr. Mellichamp and I worked together. I was simply his videographer for some short videos that he did last summer, talking about his experience with carnivorous plants, his history with Sarracenia, or the pitcher plants in particular, and a lot of interesting facts about these plants. So without further ado, I'm going to play that video, which fortunately we had Craig Maxwell work on for us.
We are looking at a bog garden, and a bog garden is a representation of bog ecology in the wild, where you have many different carnivorous plants growing together in a wet habitat made up of peat, decomposed peat moss, some sand, and other organic matter, and it's wet, it's acidic, it's nutrient poor, and those are the prime factors that make this a good place for carnivorous plants and not so good for other plants, because there's very little nutrition in a bog garden. So all of these plants that thrive in here, many of them are carnivorous, and one of the common ones are the sundews. There are 5 or 6 species of sundews in the Carolinas, and they have sticky hairs on their leaves that catch insects and oppress the insect to the leaf. See how my finger is stuck to those sticky hairs? And so this sundew will grow up about 10 inches tall and catch insects all summer. It's especially common in Florida. This particular species is not so common in North Carolina. Part of the bog ecology of the Carolinas is the famous Venus flytrap. They only grow within a 60-mile radius of Wilmington, North Carolina. And there's lots of them there where their habitat is intact. And this trap has closed up after catching something, because yesterday it was open. And here's a trap that ate something and is opened back up. You can see a carcass down in there perhaps. So by the end of the summer, these fly traps will get to be as big as your hand. Traps will only be an inch long, but they'll make lots of leaves. And then the pitcher plants mix in with these other bog denizens that can tolerate the wetness, the acidic soil, the low nutrients. And in the wild, these plants rely on periodic fire to burn through their habitats to keep out trees and shrubs that would come in and take over. We don't burn. Our bog garden here is too small. But in the wild, burning is a necessary part of bog ecology. And sometimes you can see that being done in managed bog gardens. Some of the ones owned by Nature Conservancy, if you go down and see when they're going to do a controlled burn, and you'll see what it does to the habitat. It cleans it up pretty good, and plants come back beautifully after that. This green moss here is live sphagnum moss, and it is part of the habitat, and it creates this acidic environment, and it stays pretty moist. And I keep this here to give just a kind of a green background to the other bog plants. There are non-carnivorous bog plants. There are dozens of them, and as the season progresses, you'll see there's a half a dozen orchids. They're members of the lily family, members of the sunflower family. Just upwards of 50 or more species of plants that only grow in pitcher plant bogs. Pitcher plants are interesting carnivorous plants. They catch insects in these hollow tubes. And they're very famous here in North Carolina, down at the coast, in an area called the Green Swamp. So I first got interested in pitcher plants 50 years ago when my botany professor took us down to the coast on a field trip, and he said, go out and find some pitcher plants along this road that was well known. And I spent all day long driving up and down that road and never found anything. And just as it was getting too dark to see, and I decided to head back home, I looked down right by the car, by the front tire of the car in the edge of a ditch. There was a big clump of purple pitcher plant. So it was at that moment that not only was the day not a total loss, but I found something that I was going to get interested in for the rest of my life. So that was how it began. I started growing them when I was an undergraduate, and when I went to graduate school, learned more about them. There wasn't very much known, and people weren't growing them very well. So I did some experiments to find out how to grow them and how they lived in the wild and all about their habits. And so that was interesting all through the years. Tried to get several students interested in studying them, and did have that. Several students did that down through the years and made interesting discoveries. They've been they're beautiful plants that you can just sit and look at all day. Flowers are charming. Of course, the pitchers are unusual in that they attract insects, and they get better as the season goes on, because there are not very many native plants that have leaves that are beautiful and worth looking at all the time. Early in my days of studying pitcher plants in the early 70s, I was reading the scientific literature and discovered something remarkable, that an ancestor of mine, a Dr. Joseph Mellichamp, who died in 1903 and lived in Bluffton, South Carolina, which is the southernmost town in South Carolina on the coast, he had studied pitcher plants. He was a medical doctor, and his hobby was botany. And in 1875, he published an article in the scientific literature to explain his experiments with the digestion of insects in pitcher plant leaves. Up until that time, nobody knew or even necessarily had the idea that pitcher plants were carnivorous. That is, they attracted, caught, and digested insects. So he was the first. Even Darwin, who studied insectivorous plants, did not study pitcher plants because nobody knew that they were carnivorous. So that was remarkable to discover that. And what I can do now is cut off one of these old pitchers from last year, and I'm going to slit open the hollow pitcher tube and show you what goes on during the growing season inside of a carnivorous pitcher plant. So remember that these plants have a hollow tube, and insects go in there and can't get out, and they secrete digestive juices that dissolve the soft parts of the insect. So if you cut open the tube, here's last year's undigested parts of insects that it caught during the season. And you see there's quite a lot of organic material in there from the insects that it caught. And if you tease out this material, you'd be able to discern, I can see right here, the wings and the bodies of various and sundry insects that make up last year's catch. And then these pitchers will die down and new ones will come up. And so what Dr. Mellichamp discovered was that these plants do indeed digest insects. Now, he was not necessarily able to give a lot of details about the chemistry of that, but he certainly discovered that the insect prey get caught, and then they get digested, and then they turn into leftovers, so to speak. So that was pretty remarkable. It really wasn't until the 20th century that more careful studies identifying the chemistry and the nature of the pitcher structure were carried out. These are nice new pitchers coming up on this hybrid pitcher plant. It turns out that among the 11 species of pitcher plants in the South, they all can hybridize with each other. And that's pretty remarkable for a group of plants to be able to do that. So back in the late 70s, 1977 to be exact, I decided to start making pitcher plant hybrids for the commercial trade to call attention to the plight of pitcher plants in the wild. Pitcher plants and the other carnivorous plants that grow together down in the green swamp are being lost due to drainage and development of the land. This is going on throughout the southeast, and it's really a tragedy because some of the losses were thoughtless, just draining to be draining. So I started making hybrids, and so for 10 years, from 1985 until 1995, I cross-pollinated pitcher plant species and other hybrids from the wild and from cultivation to make a series of hybrids, and named some of them and released some of them to the public, all as a way of making them more available. Because when you dig them up from the wild, they don't do as well. It's better to have ones that are grown in cultivation. So this is one of my best hybrids. It's called Love Bug. This is what I call the little bug series. I had Love Bug, Ladybug, Doodlebug, Junebug, and Redbug. And they're all growing right in here, but they're not coming up just yet. This is one of that hybrid series that I made, which was one of the first times that anybody made a concerted effort to hybridize pitcher plants with a certain goal in mind. My goal was to make easy to grow, fast growing, dwarf plants that stayed relatively good looking through the winter, and that might be attractive in small bog gardens or even in a pot, as opposed to some of the wild ones, which are very, very tall or very, very short. These hybrids were sort of intermediate. So I enjoyed doing that for 10 years, and it was a lot of work. I'm sure that I grew hundreds of thousands made hundreds of thousands of seeds, and of those grew tens of thousands of plants, and of those selected about 2 dozen to name and make an effort to introduce them to the public. Okay, we're going to look at the internal anatomy of a pitcher plant flower. They're very much like other flowers. They have sepals, 5, petals, 5. Down inside the flower, we'll see in a minute, are the stamens. And covering the whole floral structure is something unusual. This is the style. This is the part of the female part of the flower that comes up and receives pollen. And so I'm going to cut this and peel it back so you can see this umbrella-like style. And down underneath it are all the stamens. There are usually about 50 stamens. So sepals, petals, stamens, and then ovary with stigma and style. And here, and that would be a typical flower. And the style is this umbrella-shaped thing, and the stigma is right there. So this thing acts like an upside-down umbrella when it's blooming. Flowers hang upside down, and pollen falls into the umbrella. You can see some pollen in there, and accumulates in there. And bees, bumblebees, go in there and collect that pollen. They wallow around in it and get covered with it. And then they go from flower to flower. There's very little nectar. There might be some nectar in there, but the bees go in there mostly to get this quite abundant pollen. And so down inside the ovary that I've cut in half, you can see the little individual ovules, which will become seeds if they get fertilized. These are pollinated exclusively by bumblebees. And you see the bee comes into the flower and goes in through that hole right there. It's the only way in. The flower is otherwise closed over by the petals. So the bee can go in right there through that hole, and as she does, she scrapes by the stigma. The stigma is the part of the flower that receives the pollen. So if you can see that little nub right there. So she goes in there. As she goes in, she brings pollen from another flower. She goes in there and wallows around in that umbrella, upside down umbrella. You see all the pollen in there. And then when she's ready to leave, she lifts up this petal like a little trap door and exits right there easily so as not to touch the stigma. So she brings in pollen from another flower and leaves without touching her own stigma, and that prevents self-pollination. So in through that hole, over the stigma, out through the trap door under the petal, and onto another flower after wallowing in the pollen. And on all day long. So you can see the beautiful yellow stamens and the pollen that has fallen on the floor of the style. What if you had to eat that way? What if your mother threw the Cheerios down on the kitchen floor and you had to go wallow in the Cheerios and pick them up in your hands and stuff them in your mouth and pick them out of your pockets and your clothes? That's basically how bees eat. They wallow in their food, and then they clean themselves off and take that pollen back to the hive. Each little seed, and there's about 500 in there, each little seed has its own little umbilical cord that attaches it to the mother structure that feeds the seed as it grows. And this little ovary will enlarge into a seed pod about the size of your thumb. So it's going to get 2 to 4 times bigger than it is now. And these ripen in September. And so if I wanted to, I could pull the petals away. There's one petal. So you really could pull apart the flower and see the parts laying there in front of you. There's the 5 petals. And then 5 sepals that are much harder to pull off. And they stay there to protect the fruit as it develops. And these stamens will wither in a few days and just fall off after they've shed their pollen. And then the flower that was hanging upside down will straighten up and become erect as the summer goes on. So the seed pod is erect by the end of the summer, ready to disperse seed during the fall peak of hurricane season. These things are adapted to shed their seeds during hurricane season because they're water dispersed. So they would love a 12-inch rain, which would flood the countryside knee deep in water and float these seeds far and wide. And the strong winds would pick the seeds up and blow them all over the Gulf Coast and the southeast. And so that's part of their livelihood, is to be adapted for hurricane season for dispersing their seeds.
Okay, so I was really fortunate to be able to assist a little bit with that production, and I hope you enjoyed it. I am going to talk about a lot of different carnivorous plants, not just the pitcher plants. One of the things that we need to ask ourselves while we are looking at carnivorous plants is, why do some of our plants and our floras eat animals? Well, the truth is that they live in nutrient poor soil, as Dr. M mentioned, and there's almost no nitrate or calcium within that soil. And because the plants need nitrogen for creating their amino acids and protein structures, and also for their nucleic acids, they need to get those minerals or those compounds from another source. And the way that they get that source of minerals or compounds is through insect bodies. So in addition to that, the soil is often waterlogged in these types of habitats that these carnivorous plants grow in. And there's a lot of acidity to the soil, and it has a really low pH. And although that can be a source, like the ammonia that is developed in this acid environment can be a source of nitrogen, it is really quite toxic in high concentrations. So these plants have to adapt to not only the waterlogged soil, the lack of nutrients, but really strong levels of certain things within the soil that are damaging to other plants. And so we have seen, you may have seen some of these types of images through the years, and just the glorification of these carnivorous plants eating men and eating probably dinosaurs and all kinds of things. But that's not quite how it typically happens, although I do have a few things to show you that indicate that some of these plants can eat vertebrates. So carnivorous plants have actually developed at several different points along the evolution of flowering plants. In fact, at least nine different times within the evolution of angiosperms. And that has occurred within 5 different orders or groups of those flowering plants, including one occurrence in the monocots, and at least 4 in the dicot plants. You might be surprised to find out that carnivorous plants are very speciated throughout the world. There are 583 or so species. Unfortunately, about a quarter of those are threatened with extinction. So I think that Dr. M mentioned this a little bit, but nearly every type of trap that is used by these carnivorous plants are a type of modified leaf. The Venus flytrap, the bladderwort, the pitcher plants that he was talking about, sundews, most all of them, definitely all of these on this diagram are modified leaves. And they've been modified in many different ways, but over and over again, the mechanisms are repeated within these vastly different types of plant groups. And this is common in plants and also animals, that they develop certain features, even though they might not be related to one another. They develop certain features in common based on environmental pressure. Within the different types of traps that carnivorous plants use, there are two major types: passive traps and active traps. So the pitcher plants, as he showed you when he dissected them, those are pitfall traps. So the organisms fall in, they can't come out, and they are trapped there and they get digested. There are also flypaper traps, which are sticky traps that some of them are passive, which means the leaves with the sticky substance don't move or morph when that's caught an insect. And there are others that do change and morph. And then other active traps include snap traps, such as the Venus flytrap, and also suction traps. The plants with pitfall traps include plants that are in the temperate forests, temperate bogs, coastal bogs, and also tropical areas. All of these are very moist areas. And the leaves are folded into these tubes that hold water. Pitcher plants alone have evolved independently in 6 different categories of flowering plants. So the pitcher plants that we see in our native flora are actually nowhere related to the nepenthes or the monkey cups, also called the tropical pitcher plants. These analogous structures that have similar form or function, when they evolve separately in different groups of organisms, it's called convergent evolution. Here you see a diagram of the pitcher plant leaf, and it has, this is one of our native types of pitcher plants, not the tropical kind. It has a hood or a lid that goes over the pitcher proper. That helps to keep rainwater out, so the enzymes that are in the tunnel don't get diluted by rainwater. And then there is a peristome, which is this area that is constricted just a little bit around the mouth of the pitcher. This is an area that, believe it or not, produces nectar. You might think that nectar is always born in flowers, but for pitcher plants, they utilize nectar glands to produce nectar to coax the insects or other organisms into these pitfall traps. And then the water here at the bottom has enzymes that help dissolve the bodies of and digest the bodies of the insects. And then along the sides of the pitcher plant is a waxy covering of little scales that are very slippery. So once an organism gets into the pitcher, it's nearly impossible for it to get traction to get back out. And that is further inhibited by this ring around the peristome, which creates a cup, a lip that prevents the insects from being able to progress out of the pitcher. So this genus of plants, the Sarracenia, which is Dr. M's passion, they are distributed through much of North America, but particularly in the northern climes and like the northern bogs and the mountain bogs through the Appalachians, and then also in the coastal regions. Another type of plant with pitfall traps is the tropical pitcher plant, Nepenthes. Here's another diagram, very similar to our temperate forest native pitchers, except that these tend to form vining habits instead of our pitcher plants, which are kind of clumping and attached directly to the ground. And you notice here that the lip of this chamber curls, and you can imagine it trapping the insects underneath of that. Some other interesting aspects of both types of pitcher plants is that they have these seams along the pitcher, which helps to create some structure for the pitcher so that it can retain heavy amounts of water. And the tropical pitchers often have these tendrils that allow them to stay upright even when they're descending from a vining plant. There are over 100 species of Nepenthes, or tropical pitcher plants, and they have some really interesting ecologies. For instance, the largest of the Nepenthes raja, has mutualistic or agreeable relationships with a couple of well, actually 3 different mammals. 2 of them are rodents, and 1 of them is a bat. So the rodents and the bat both utilize the plant for different things, and then they actually defecate into the pitcher, and that provides a source of the nitrogen and other chemicals that the plant needs in order to make its proteins. And as feces, the nitrogen and other chemicals are easily available to the pitcher plant because it doesn't have to digest an entire organism in order to get that. So in the case of the rodents get nectar rewards. And then in the case of the bat actually roosts inside of the pitcher plant, upside down above the water line. And then back to our native pitchers, although this is the mechanism that happens with all of the pitfall traps, you see a cross-section of last year's pitcher with beetles and all kinds of flies and other decomposing bodies. Here's some live kill, some beetles and so forth in a live pitcher plant. And then you see that even some small vertebrates such as salamanders, lizards, sometimes even rodents will fall prey to these types of pitfall traps. Another type of pitcher-like plant or pitfall plant is a related species to the Sarracenia or art pitchers from the southeast and Canada. It's a different genus though. Darlingtonia is the cobra lily, and these are found in at the west coast, including California. And one of the interesting tricks that this plant has up its sleeve is that notice it has whitened, clearish spots on its topmost side. What happens is the insects enter into this cobra lily leaf, and then they see these little windows, like stained glass windows, and they try to get out of the cobra through these windows, but they're false windows. So oftentimes they will just succumb to the shape of the pitcher and fall into the enzyme water. Another similar looking but not related plant that forms a pitcher with its leaf is a plant that has 23 different species, and these are all from South America. And also, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with the tropicals, but there's also a similar one from Australia, which is in a completely different genetic group. So those are all the pitfall traps. But let's move on now to the plants that have flypaper mechanisms. So you see that there are these sticky hairs on the surface of the leaf in these plants. Some are, depending on the species, there might be some low ones, but most of the time with the sundew in particular, these are very elongated hairs with this sticky mucilage at the end, little drops that were sticking to Dr. M's finger when he was showing his video. And this type of catching mechanism for insects, this alone has evolved at least 5 times throughout geologic time. And there are 3 main types of plants that have this mechanism. One is only represented by 1 species. This is one of the very few carnivorous plants which is not found in a moist area or an acidic bog type environment or a tropical area. So the Portuguese sundew, which is actually not in the same genus as our sundews, it grows in the desert. And the hairs on this plant do not move. So once a fly lands on the hairs, it just becomes trapped, but the hairs and the leaves do not move in order to help absorb or enclose that insect. A little bit more effective is our native sundews and those plants that are related to them throughout the temperate zones of the world. And these are active flypaper traps. The sundews use acid within their cell structure along those hairs to elongate the cells to change how the hairs curve, and thus they enclose the prey, creating kind of a pocket or a stomach of sorts in order to digest the prey. Sundews are in the genus Drosera, and there are over 190 species of Drosera, and they range from the temperate to the tropical regions of the world. Another passive sticky flypaper trap is the butterwort. I notice that the hairs on the butterwort are quite short. They do not move. And what this plant does instead of moving its hairs is that it can rapidly grow portions of its leaf in order to roll over and enclose the insects somewhat. Or it can also change the shape of the surface of the leaf in order to create a little pit to retain the insects until all the good stuff is absorbed. And the butterworts are inclusive of at least 83 species throughout the world. And we have at least 3 species within our native flora, and we'll look at those in a moment. So another type of active trap, but this one is probably the one that comes to mind whenever we think of traps, is the Venus flytrap. The Venus flytrap is considered a snap trap, and there is one other type of snap traps. The snap traps have hinged leaves. So this is a portion of the leaf. This is essentially the leaf blade. It has the hinge down the middle, and it snaps shut when the trigger hairs are touched. Typically, there are 3 trigger hairs on each half of that leaf. And the interesting thing about the trigger hairs is that in order for the leaf to close, it does take quite a bit of energy for the plant. It depletes its energy. So it doesn't want to waste closing if it's just a water droplet that touches on the surface of the leaf, or if it's wind or something like that. So the flytrap actually must be stimulated, the trigger hairs must be stimulated at least twice within a less than 30 seconds span. And once the trap closes on the insect after the trigger hairs have been stimulated twice, the insects continue to struggle, and that just encourages the trap to close even more tightly. and that forms somewhat of a cavity or a stomach for digestion as well. For the Venus flytrap, it takes about 1 to 2 weeks for the trap to absorb the nutrients from the insects or whatever they might eat. There are some images of frogs and snails and slugs on video that you might want to look at on YouTube. The leaves can only be used 3 or 4 times, and then they are completely spent. So if you have a fly trap, it's important that you don't tease the fly trap. You want to always feed it insects or other agreeable food so that it can get energy from its efforts. Okay. Within the North Carolina area, which is North Carolina and South Carolina, are the only places that Venus flytraps are found in the wild. Within some of the populations in the green swamp and other places, they have a really rich red color to their leaves. And this red color is attractive to insects because it almost mimics flowers in its coloration. And the same is true with the pitcher plants, which often have hoods that are colored or patterned in such a way that they mimic flowers. So a less commonly known snap trap is an aquatic plant called a water wheel. Here we see the little traps, which are numerous on the plant, whirled along the stem. Each of these are modified leaves, and they have trigger hairs too. The trigger hairs are on the outside of the leaves. And this plant is called water wheel or Aldrovanda. And notice it has many trigger hairs, not just the 3 that the flytrap has. And the way that it closes its hinged trap is a combination of turgor pressure or cell rigidity, and then also exchanges of calcium and ions throughout this between the cell membranes. Water wheels are, there's only one species of water wheel, but it is found through much of Africa, Australia, Europe, and Asia. We do not have any native water wheels in our flora. But we do have something that looks somewhat similar, that has a completely different mechanism for obtaining prey, and that is the bladderwort. Bladderworts are also aquatic carnivorous plants, but their mechanism is suction. Instead of having a bifolded leaf that holds the insect through that turgor pressure and the hinge, bladderworts create a partial vacuum within these bladders. All of these little round things are carnivorous bladders, and the bladders also have trigger hairs. So the bladders have a little trap door or hinged door, and they become vacuum ready with the door closed. And then when an aquatic invertebrate grazes by those trigger hairs, the vacuum is broken, and the bladder sucks in the invertebrate extremely quickly, and there it gets trapped, and it is digested by the plant. Bladderworts, there are approximately 240 species of this genus throughout the world. And in the Carolinas alone, we have several species, at least 4 in North Carolina, possibly more. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the mechanisms or the ways that these carnivorous plants get their food. But let's talk a little bit more about the environments in which they live. Bogs are common areas in which carnivorous plants live, particularly in temperate climates. This is made up of a fresh water body, and they are wet or soggy depressions where water enters through rain or runoff, but it doesn't have a stream to release the water. So it just sits there and does not move. And because of the plants that live in this environment, and them decomposing slowly over time, the soil is very, very acidic. And as I mentioned before, it has low nutrients. And because of this low nutrient, acidic type of environment, there are few trees or shrubs that are able to thrive in this environment. So the canopy remains relatively open. You will see coniferous trees and some ericaceous or heath type shrubs around the edges. But for the most part, it's wide open and very sunny. So there are different types of bogs. We have northern bogs and southern bogs, which are really not quite bogs. They are more of a sandy, wet meadow. So the northern bogs are known for being very spongy and very unpredictable, scary to walk on. You can sink very deep because the peat that underlays these bogs is full of water, and sometimes the peat, which is actually dead sphagnum moss, can be meters thick and very, very soft. Whereas the southern bogs are typically underlaying with a mix of this peat with sand. And so the soil is quite a bit more compacted and easier to walk on and not quite so quaking or spongy. The peatlands have previously been through much of North America, and they were actually pushed down southward during the advance of the glaciers. And then when the glaciers, which could be up to a mile thick at the highest point of glaciation, when those started to recede around 12,000 years ago, that cold environment that was pushed with them down to the south regressed up to the north. And with that, the cool temperatures regressed as well, and the south became warmer and warmer over time. And as the glaciers retreated, many of the communities of plants that we see in the bogs actually, instead of going northward, they went up in elevation, up the mountains. So we see some bogs that are along the mountains, as you see here. This is the Appalachian Mountains. And then we also have some of those wet, sandy, boggy meadows along the coastal plain. All of the carnivorous bogs and wet meadows that are in our North American flora are underlain with species of, or multiple species of sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is very speciated throughout the world. There's about 380 species of sphagnum. And you notice in these two diagrams, the structure of the cells of the sphagnum is very open. The green cells that you see are the ones that actually photosynthesize, and then these open cells between the photosynthesizing cells act as water retainers and sponges. This is so effective in retaining water that live sphagnum can hold between 7 to 20 times its volume in water. And that's what these carnivorous plants need in order to provide that moisture for them to succeed. Sphagnum moss also decomposes very, very slowly, and it maintains that pH of the soil around pH of 3. Once sphagnum moss dies, it becomes known as peat, and then eventually peat will turn darker, from a darker brown to a black, and eventually, over many millennia, it can form coal. So bogs, begin with a depression in the land, which is filled with water. And many of these were from glaciers. Little bits of glaciers would remain as the large masses retreated. And the glaciers also pushed sediment around, sandy, well-drained sediment. And that sediment and those rough pools would be left after glaciation. And in the north, in Canada and the northeastern US, these types of pools became known as kettle lakes. And once again, these are depressions that have no outlet, dependent on rain and runoff to keep it filled. And as you can imagine, as that sphagnum moss creates peat and layer upon layer upon layer are formed, then slowly those kettle lakes and other wetland areas will fill in with organic material. One thing I did want to mention is that these northern bogs do not have dependence on fire like like all of the southern bogs. And as the lake succession continues, the land becomes more and more solid and less quaky in the north. Peat is actually harvested because it is so dense and so flammable. It is mined for fuel. It is also mined for building blocks for structures. It can be utilized for creating potting soil. But unfortunately, when this peat is harvested, methane gas is released, and that can have quite a bit of an environmental effect. And it's important to note that even though only the top few inches of the peatlands is alive with vascular plants and sphagnum moss, there can be many, many feet of peat accumulated, particularly in Northern Europe, Northern Russia, and Canada. The environments that are created by this type of acidic conditions has been known to essentially preserve bodies very well, dating back as long as 8,000 years ago, or I'm sorry, 8,000 BC, so about 10,000 years ago. This example is called the Toland man from Denmark, and he was dated as living in the 4th century BC. In this type of acidic bog condition, the skin and any type of material that has keratin in it, like hair, is preserved. Hair and nails are preserved completely. Even the internal organs are preserved. Leather is preserved. But the bones of the people or sometimes organisms that have been found in this type of environment have not been preserved because the environment leaches calcium from the bones. In some of these people who have been researched, it's even seen that the stomach contents of their last meal are still intact. So not only does the acid contribute to the slow decay of organic material in the bogs, but also the low temperatures of the northern environments and this anaerobic or lack of oxygen environment within the soil. So as I mentioned, northern bogs are one large class of bogs. These span from the Great Lakes and Canada to New England and the Maritime provinces. They're made of sphagnum, of course, some scattered shrubs, and then around the edges, spruce and fir trees start to succeed. Bog mats are formed, and they're a giant sponge. And Dr. M actually described it as somewhat of a waterbed type of feel, just wet and soupy, which, and he also mentioned that it's fairly dangerous to walk into the bogs unaccompanied. Within this type of soil, it's all organic. There is no sand, no clay within the northern bogs. It's just all organic materials from dead plants. There are many different types of interesting plants that grow in these northern bogs, including the purple pitcher plant, sundews of a few different species, bladderworts, orchids such as this dragonmouth orchid, rose begonia orchid, and grass pink orchid, which we'll see in some of the mountain bogs as we go down the Appalachians. And then also the heath family, such as rhododendron, laurel, blueberries, leatherleaf, and cranberries. And then along the edges, black spruce, larches, and other types of spruce. These are really harsh environments. And the reason that the heath plants and the orchids can do so well here is because they have fungal associations with, or they have associations with fungus, which helps them to get the materials they need from their environment. And the conditions in which they live without the fungus associate creates conditions which restrict other plants from intruding into this habitat. So as I mentioned, the purple pitcher plant is found in the northern bogs. And as you can see here, it is also found in the Appalachian high elevation bogs and in the coastal plain. The purple pitcher plant is fairly squatty and fat, and it has a hood that does not completely cover it and protect the pitcher from water, but it does somewhat. There are many different types of bogs in different locations as you scale down to the south. The New Jersey pine barrens, cranberry glades, and then some remnant bogs in Virginia, which we won't talk much about. There are also bogs in southeast North Carolina and west North Carolina, and then remnants in central or the Piedmont, and then also scattered throughout other southern states. The New Jersey pine barrens are known for their cranberries, and in fact, the cranberries in the New Jersey pine barrens are the that's where most of the commercial cranberry production is within the United States. One of my favorite places, and actually the first place I ever truly saw a bog, was in West Virginia at the Cranberry Glades. And I took these pictures actually just maybe a month ago. I visited after a long time of not being in the area. And you can see it's mentioned here with this flower shape in southeastern West Virginia. There's a boardwalk that goes through the whole thing because of that quaking aspect, even though it's not a northern bog, because it is along that mountain chain. It has many elements of the mountain bog. And you can see that there is some shrubbery, but a lot of this is ferns. The shrubs that we do see are heath shrubs. And the glades or bogs within West Virginia are depressions between mountains. And you can see that particularly in this next slide. You see mountains in the background, a little bit of incursion of these spruces, and then this low open meadow-like bog that has many ferns. It also has pitcher plants and sundews, orchids, and all kinds of other interesting things like our relatively rare painted trillium. One side of the Cranberry Glades is it's moist and quaky, but the other side is almost swampy and open like this, with many dead standing trees. And along the edges, you can see many of those bog plant species that you would see in the northern bogs. So another species of the pitcher plant that is found within these mountain bogs is the green pitcher plant, as well as the purple pitcher plant. Sarracenia aureophila means mountain loving. So this is a mountain species exclusively, and you see it has a relatively limited range. Moving away from the pitcher plants, as I mentioned, there are sundews of different species. This is the roundleaf sundew, and you can see these vining cranberries. This is in the same genus as the blueberries, Vaccinium. And in the next picture, we see some of the unripe cranberries along with the grass pink orchid and the rose begonia orchid, which is found in some of these mountain bogs. And then you might recognize this plant somewhat. This is a Canadian yew. It's similar to the taxus that many of us have to contend with as landscape foundation plants that we have to rip out by hand after many years of them becoming established. But the yew, the taxus genus, is actually very, very beneficial to humans. The Canadian yew is not terribly common within West Virginia. It's more common up in the northern bogs. But the taxus genus is known for being helpful in treatment of ovarian, breast, and lung cancers. So next time you fight with the taxus bush in your front yard, think about their beneficial qualities. Some other non-carnivorous plants that you'll find in the mountain bogs include the Appalachian grass of Parnassus, which is also called kidney-leaved grass of Parnassus on the left, and then the Parnassia grandifolia on the right. And the beautiful venation of those petals is just remarkable. But you see that the distribution is very spotty throughout the mountains, in the Appalachian grass of Parnassus, and then throughout the southeast with the other species. Some other common mountain bog plants include skunk cabbage, which is one of the arums. This is the leaves after it flowers first, typically in February, really, really early. And then after it flowers and it goes to fruit, which you see here under the leaves, then it develops the leaves. A somewhat similar looking plant at early stages is the false hellebore. And here you see its flowers and its large leaves, which superficially can resemble the skunk cabbage. Not only are carnivorous plants found in these special areas, but we also have a few special animals found in bogs that are not found elsewhere. One of them is the bog turtle. And the bog turtle is actually the smallest turtle in the United States. It is considered critically endangered. This individual is just a baby, but even at full size, they only get to be about 3.5 inches long. And for some reason, they have the same species has 2 different populations which are separated by many, many miles. This is considered a disjunct population. Same species, just separated by geography. So you can imagine after many, 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 many years, it's possible that the bog turtle could develop into 2 subspecies or possibly even species within those 2 geographic ranges. Another endemic animal to the bogs are the bog lemmings. And though there is a northern and a southern bog lemming, but the southern reaches down just barely into the mountains of North Carolina. This map is an indication of where certain types of trees which are affiliated with mountain bogs are currently distributed. And you can see that there is a scattering of them along the Appalachian Mountains, but for the most part, those species have retreated up into the northern colder climates. Bogs at one point in history were very prevalent throughout the southeast, not only on the coastal areas, but throughout the flatlands of the Piedmont and then into the mountains. But now, because of development and draining of the land and all kinds of other pressures, the mountain bogs are limited to just a few little spots throughout the western edge of our state. And I'm not exactly sure where we are on the preservation of these, but this was a proposed preservation plan for some of those mountain bogs. Less well protected are the Piedmont bogs. There are a few very small relics, including the Black Ankle bog in Montgomery County near Statesville in the Uwharrie National Forest. And now we're going to move to the coast. The coastal bogs include, in North Carolina, the area around Wilmington, Lake Waccamaw, which is a Carolina bay, and also the Green Swamp. I had the pleasure of joining Dr. Mellichamp for his last trip to the Green Swamp a couple years ago, and many of the pictures you saw in his presentation of individuals, and then in this presentation were taken there. The Green Swamp is south of Wilmington. It's about 20,000 acres of preserved land, and it's a mosaic of wet and dry areas. Wet peat with sand substrate, so not spongy like the northern bogs, but there's some areas that are quite a bit more open and dry, and other areas that are open and moist. And there is high speciation, high diversity within the Green Swamp and related areas. There has been records of an average of 40 plant species per square acre within the preserve. And this particular image is of the long-tailed skipper butterfly on a blazing star or liatris. One of the types of habitats which make up the Carolina coastal bogs mosaic is the drier of three, which is the pine flatwoods. This is wet, sandy, peaty soil, often with pitcher plants and fly traps. There's sparse tree cover, and the trees that are there are typically longleaf pine. Longleaf pine have three distinct growing phases. Here in the foreground, you see the grass stage. It looks like grass, just like this wire grass, very similar. Its second stage is the candle stage, where it shoots up a little stem, and then it goes into the adult stage, which is a tree with a significant bole. This type of three-stage life enables the plant to withstand fire, which is a very common event within this type of habitat, both naturally occurring and also prescribed burns in order to maintain the habitat. Within this type of bog and within these flatwoods, we have some interesting plants, including the pine barren gentian and the orange milkwort. And milkwort is known as an indicator species for finding fly traps. So if you're ever down in the coastal plain and you see the milkworts, if you're in a nice moist area, it's quite likely that you will see fly traps as well. Going to a little bit of a wetter area within the coastal bogs, we have a wet meadow. Wet meadows have an open canopy. There are many pitcher plants within this type of ecosystem, and an interesting grass called toothache grass. This is underlain by soil that is half sand and half peat. And then as we move into even a wetter area, we get into standing water, where you will find such species as pond pine, pitcher plants, and raised areas where the peat has built up over time, and bog buttons. In addition, you will see such plants as sundew and of different species, and then also Iris tridentata. Within these coastal plains, there are several species of pitcher plant. We are really fortunate within our southeastern Florida to have so much diversity. We have the hooded pitcher plant, which I mentioned. This type of mechanism is similar to the cobra lily of these stained glass window types spaces within the hood. Also, we have the sweet pitcher plant, which is Sarracenia rubra, with somewhat of a wide distribution. White pitcher plant, which is actually known to glow. You know, a lot of our white plants, white flowers, such as moonflower, they tend to glow under moonlight, which attracts bugs to them. So that's an adaptation that this species has. Not found in North Carolina, a little bit more west and south of us. And here's a whole field full of them. This is at Splinter Bog in Alabama. The yellow pitcher plant, Sarracenia flava, is all along the coast and the panhandle of Florida. Within the nectar that bribes the insects into this plant's pitcher, there is a toxic chemical called conine, and it's similar, or actually the same chemical that's found in poison hemlock, and it is an adaptation to intoxicate the prey so that the prey falls into the pitcher and is absorbed by the plant. Here's a nice little stand of those. The mountain sweet pitcher plant can be found obviously in the mountains. I don't have a distribution map that's broken down into counties, but I would say that this, I should have included this in the mountain section. Sarracenia jonesii, I think at one point was considered a subspecies of rubra. I might be wrong about that, but it's since been split out. Yellow trumpets, Sarracenia alata, also quite a bit west of us. Sarracenia alabamense, which is, there are two subspecies of this, and this particular one only has a 2-county distribution within Alabama. Venus flytrap, there you see a trap, the flowers, which I did not show you before, I believe, and then the fruits with the ripening seeds. Venus flytrap, you know, we are very familiar with it because of where we live and because it is so prized by children particularly and plant enthusiasts. But the Carolinas is the only place where this plant is found naturally. The black counties are historical records. The red counties are where it currently can be found. Utricularia or bladderwort that I mentioned before, this gives you a little bit of the scale of the bladders on the bladderwort. These little tiny modified leaves that inhale insect, aquatic invertebrates. We have at least 4 species within our flora, ranging from a white to a purple to a yellow flower. Floating bladderwort, purple bladderwort, slender bladderwort, and southern bladderwort. There is also an invasive bladderwort, which is in the southeast, that we need to be mindful of. Not bladderworts, but butterworts also has a fair bit of diversity within the southeast. There's the yellow butterwort and its distribution, the blue butterwort. Notice the sphagnum moss and the sundew right there next to it. And then the small butterwort as well. And notice those leaves are curling over and holding on to the insect prey. Other coastal bog plants include a different species of the grass of Parnassus. This is the Carolina grass of Parnassus. Also the rose gentian, colic root, and narrow leaf milkweed. Also this really interesting relative of mountain laurel. This is dwarf laurel, also called sheepkill or lambskill. There is a swamp azalea within this environment and barbarous buttons, Marshallia graminifolia, in these types of habitats. Like the mountain bogs, the coastal bogs also have some rare animals, including the pine barrens tree frog and the red cockaded woodpecker. For all of these species, in order for the environments to maintain the ecosystem health that helps plants survive and the animals survive. Within the southern savannas and boglands, there must be fire. There must be fire, and the organizations that preserve these lands prescribe burn the areas on rotation every few years. The areas are naturally prone to low intensity fires. So the fires roll on the ground typically. They don't light up the tree and into the canopy. And what this does is it removes the shrub layer and the herbaceous layer without damaging the large trees. Fire ecology of this sort that the bogs are dependent on begins in North Carolina and moves southward. And fire helps curtail the competition of other plants. In addition, any type of disturbance, as long as it's not too severe, is good for bogs, especially if it creates small depressions, as long as there is wetness that is preserved and the fire regimen is maintained. And so in this image you see on the left, this is taken at the green swamp. On the left is what is left after a prescribed burn. You see charring on the tree trunks, open layer on the ground. And then on the right, you see an area that has not been burned yet. Here is a map of some of the prescribed and natural fires within the southeast, and you can see that it's fairly frequent to have fires in these types of ecosystems. So fire is not always a bad thing, and many of our species in the coastal plain depend on it. Just a few more words about these ecosystems. The longleaf pine is the predominant tree species within the coastal plain and the area of the bogs and the wet meadows. You notice that longleaf pine used to have a very extensive range, and now it is just little bits of longleaf scattered throughout the southern states. Longleaf once covered as much as 90 million acres, and now it is only 3% of that remaining. Pine plantations have replaced a lot of the native forests. Forests have also been drained for development. The weather is warming, so some of them are just drying up from climate change. And also there's the impact of people who are coming into the area to poach for some of the carnivorous and other plants. So I appreciate you staying with me through this whirlwind of carnivorous plants and their habitats. And I know I went way over, but I am happy to take some questions if you would like to ask some. Just make sure you unmute yourself.
Hey, Amy, we did have one question back when Dr. M's video was playing around. He had chicken wire around some of his plants. Are they attractive to rabbits or other wildlife?
I believe that he puts those up for the squirrels. The squirrels tend to uproot the pitcher plants.
I was wondering too about critters attacking your Venus flytraps, and it sounded like somebody was using chicken wire around them.
Yes.
And so we've already had that happen, that something dug it up and we replanted and it got dug up again. And the other thing I wondered is if it's better to have them planted in an area in the ground that you've changed to look like, to approximate bog soil, or to have them in a pot with bog soil, and so that you can plant in the ground in the wintertime.
My thought on that is anytime you can plant in the ground, you're going to have better luck regardless of the type of plant, because you don't have to worry about the moisture regimen as much.
Mm-hmm.
In containers, they tend to dry out, and moisture is so very important for these native carnivorous plants that you're in danger of not being able to maintain that moisture. I have a little bog in my backyard, and I established a relatively sizable area And I put chicken wire around it as well and
Mhm.
staked it. And I think that's given me a lot more success than if I had a shallow pot. I mean,
That's
you can do pots, but if you do a pot, you'll definitely want to put a retaining liner underneath of it and keep a little bit of water in it at all times.
great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Oh, and also for your gardening purposes, it's important not to use city water because city water tends to be alkaline.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so use distilled if you can, or rainwater.
Gotcha.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining us. We will get a copy of this up on our YouTube and we'll keep you posted about September. So thanks, everybody.